There is a figure that crosses cultures, centuries, and mythologies, the being that inhabits the border between what is known and what has not yet been named. She is ancient, and antiquity, for those who know how to read it, is another word for depth. That is why she is here, at this workbench, in this silent laboratory where nothing explodes and everything, slowly, transforms. She does not teach, she shows. And today she is holding an empty vial as if it were a question. There is a moment almost everyone has lived. You are leaving the house, maybe running late, and someone says something about you. A quick sentence, sometimes not even meant badly. It could be a small criticism, a comparison, something said in passing, and that's it. The entire day carries it. Not the event, the sentence, or the opposite. You are exhausted, without energy for anything. The week has been heavy, and someone says something simple to you. You can do this. I know you can. And something inside you shifts position. Not dramatically, but it shifts, as if a weight had been repositioned. It was not a change of circumstance. It was not an external event. It was not luck. It was a sentence. We tend to treat words like packaging, as if they were merely the wrapper around an idea that already exists before being spoken. The word arrives, we grasp the content, and the packaging is discarded, like crumpled paper in the corner of a table. But what if the word were not the packaging? What if it were the substance itself? Think about what you say to yourself throughout an ordinary day. Not what you say to others, what you say inward. That constant, almost inaudible stream that runs beneath everything you do. From the first hours of the morning until the moment you close your eyes at night. What an idiot. I messed up again. I'll never be able to keep this up. This is just how I am. There's no changing it. I'm not good at this. My life is a mess. Most of these sentences pass through without being perceived as sentences. They feel like just thoughts. They feel like reality being observed honestly. A kind of difficult lucidity. But something very curious is happening there, and it's worth sitting with that curiosity for a moment. When you say, I am anxious, are you describing a state or are you creating an identity? It sounds like an abstract philosophical question, but it isn't. There is an enormous and very practical difference between I am feeling anxiety right now and I am an anxious person. The first is the observation of a passing moment. The second is a declaration about who you are. One is today's weather. The other is the climate of your entire country. And your nervous system, your memory, the way you interpret what happens to you, the choices you perceive as possible or impossible, all of it begins to organize itself around that declaration, as if it were an invisible anchor that structures what you are able or unable to see. Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, said something that sounds simple but becomes unsettling when you stay with it long enough. He said that the limits of your language are the limits of your world, not as a poetic metaphor, as a statement about how reality works for a human being who thinks in words. What does that mean in practice? If you have no words for an experience, it exists for you in a vague, diffuse form, difficult to access and difficult to communicate, even to yourself. That is why sometimes you feel something and cannot name it, and that very inability leaves you even more disoriented. The experience exists, but it floats without shape, without edges, without defined weight. But when an experience gains a name, it gains contour. It gains weight. It begins to occupy a different space in your life, something that can be observed, questioned, worked with. And the reverse is also true, and this is where things get denser. When you name something repeatedly, you are sculpting the space it occupies inside you, not as a conscious choice, as a chemical process, slow, constant, cumulative. Every time you say, I have no discipline, you are not simply describing a trait of yours. You are depositing a layer, and the layers accumulate, and after enough time, they feel like rock. Think of a difficult experience you have lived through. It could be a loss, a failure, a relationship that ended badly, a job that did not work out. The event happened. That is fact. But what you said about that event to others and above all to yourself was what determined what that event became in your life. whether it became proof that you are not capable of holding things together, or whether it became a chapter in a story that has not yet ended and that you have not yet fully understood. The event was the same. The word about the event is what created the meaning. And here is what is truly curious. A fact is something you observe. A repeated word is something you, gradually and without noticing, construct. The question is not positive versus negative. It never was. It is conscious versus automatic. It is about recognizing that there is a difference between describing your life and fabricating your life, and that this difference lives precisely in the words you use about it, every day, most of the time without noticing. There is a very common misunderstanding when this subject comes up. People hear the power of words and immediately think, I need to stop saying negative things. I need to police myself. I'll monitor my language. I'll replace bad thoughts with good ones. And then they do exactly that. Swap, I can't do it for I am incredible. But with the same degree of automatism as before, as if they had changed the label on the vial but left the same liquid inside. And it does not work. You already know this somewhere. You have already tried some version of it and felt the strangeness of repeating a sentence that does not feel true. Because the problem was never the content of the words. The problem is that they are happening without you knowing they are happening. Imagine a laboratory where a chemical process has been underway for decades. Substances being mixed silently, reactions happening, compounds forming layer upon layer, and the alchemist responsible for this laboratory has never entered it. They are outside doing other things, answering messages, watching something, sleeping, assuming the laboratory is empty. It is not. The process continues with or without them. This is more or less what happens with most of us in relation to our own inner language. The laboratory of our identity is running all the time, and who is in control most of the time is not us. It is the sentences we inherited, the ones we heard so many times that they stopped sounding like sentences and started sounding like truths. The philosopher and linguist J.L. Austin developed an idea in the 1950s that was considered radical at the time and remains uncomfortable to this day. He noticed that there are two completely different types of sentences. Sentences that describe the world, and sentences that do things in the world. He called the second kind performative acts. I now pronounce you husband and wife. That sentence does not describe a marriage that already exists. It creates the marriage in the moment it is spoken. I promise. That sentence is not a comment about a promise. It is the promise. Without the sentence, there is no promise. The word does not represent the act. The word is the act. Austin was thinking about formal and institutional contexts, but the intuition he opened is far larger than the territory he explored. Because perhaps, and this is what is worth sitting with slowly, perhaps I can't change is also a performative act. Perhaps I always ruin good things is too, not an observation about reality, a declaration that creates and recreates the reality it claims to observe. Every time you repeat that sentence, you are not merely describing a pattern. You are renewing a contract with it. And there lies the real turning point. Not the turning point of say nicer things about yourself, but the turning point of realizing that you are speaking all the time, that there is a constant narration happening inside you, and that this narration is not neutral, is not objective, is not simply reality being faithfully recorded. It is a construction, and you, most of the time, are not present in that construction. It happens on its own with ingredients you did not choose. When you say, "This always happens to me," what are you doing? Are you observing a pattern? Or are you solidifying one? Are you describing reality? Or are you closing your perception to everything that contradicts that sentence? The question is not rhetorical. It is genuine, and it has no easy answer. But perhaps the question itself is enough to interrupt something. There is a very ancient idea that appears in cultures that never had contact with one another. The idea that the world was spoken before it was made. In the book of Genesis, God does not manufacture, does not sculpt, does not build. He speaks, "Let there be light," and there is light. In the Jewish tradition, this creative power of the word carries its own theological depth. The word does not represent reality. It inaugurates it. It does not point to what exists. It summons what does not yet exist into being. You can read this as theology, or you can read it as a very deep and very ancient intuition about the nature of human language. I am not suggesting that you are divine or that your words create physical reality from nothing. I am pointing to something more subtle and perhaps more unsettling than that. For a conscious human being, the boundary between naming something and creating something is far more permeable than we seem to believe in daily life. When you name an experience, it becomes real in a different way. When you name it repeatedly, it becomes structure. And when it becomes structure, it is no longer an experience you have, it becomes the ground beneath your feet. Alan Watts, who spent his entire life on the border between Western philosophy and Eastern thought, said something that still resonates long after he said it. He said that we are deceived by grammar. The structure of the language we speak forces us to talk as if there were a fixed, solid, permanent I that has experiences. I feel anxiety. I have fear. I am insecure. This grammatical structure creates the illusion of a stable subject carrying attributes the way someone carries objects in a backpack. But perhaps it is more honest and more accurate to say anxiety is happening. Fear is happening. A wave of insecurity is moving through here right now. The difference is not merely semantic. It is a difference of identity. I am anxious fixes. I am feeling anxiety right now releases, not because the anxiety disappears, but because you stop being it and return to being the one who observes it. And the one who observes has options that the one who has merged with the phenomenon cannot even perceive. The language we use about ourselves is not merely communication. It is structure. It is the invisible architecture through which we inhabit our own experience. And changing that architecture is not cosmetic, is not positive thinking, is not self-persuasion. It is a form of perception. There is a contemplative practice in Buddhism, in the tradition of mindfulness, what in Pali is called sati, that consists of observing the inner flow of words and stories without merging with them, without suppressing them, without replacing them with better ones. Simply watching, with the same calm of someone watching clouds pass through the sky, without climbing into any of them. The intention is not to silence the mind. It is to create a space between you and what the mind produces. To recognize that you are not the stories you tell about yourself. You are the one who tells them. And that space, that small, fragile, precious space between the impulse to speak and the word you choose to use, is where something begins that very few things can create. Not the certainty that change will come, the possibility that it might. Just as the alchemist fox does not create what is inside the vials from nothing. She works with what already exists in the matter. She reveals what was already there. Perhaps attention to language does not add something new to you. Perhaps it only removes, layer by layer, what was deposited without awareness, and lets through what was always there, but that the wrong words had never allowed to appear. And that space, that small, fragile, precious space between the impulse to speak and the word you choose to use, is where something begins that very few things can create. Not the certainty that change will come, the possibility that it might. Just as the alchemist fox does not create what is inside the vials from nothing. She works with what already exists in the matter. She reveals what was already there. Perhaps attention to language does not add something new to you. Perhaps it only removes, layer by layer, what was deposited without awareness, and lets through what was always there, but that the wrong words had never allowed to appear. You are going to leave this video and say something before the day is over. Probably many things. About the day, about yourself, about what is happening, about what is not working, about what you want and what you fear. And most of those words will pass the way they always have, fast, automatic, almost invisible. And that is fine. There is no enlightened version of this where you monitor every syllable all the time. That would be exhausting, artificial, and in the end, useless. This is not about control. It never was. It is about presence. Perhaps the only gesture that matters is a small and intermittent one. Pause sometimes. A moment, not every moment, just some, before repeating the same old story about who you are and what you cannot do. Not to replace the sentence with a prettier one, but to notice that you are telling a story. To remember that stories are not facts. To create, if only for a second, that space we spoke about. the space between you and what you say about yourself. The fox did not create the liquid that now glows inside the vial. It was in the matter all along, waiting the way certain things wait, for someone to pay enough attention that it could finally appear. She simply worked with it, slowly, without hurry, without any guarantee of a result, with the patience of someone who knows that real processes take real time. Perhaps it is the same with the language you use about yourself. It is not about building a new identity from scratch. It is not about erasing everything said until now. Perhaps it is about pausing sometimes, about noticing what is being deposited, about choosing, in the moments when choice is possible, a word that is more true, not more positive, not more beautiful, but more true, closer to what you actually perceive when you are present, rather than what the autopilot repeats out of habit. The process has not ended. It never really ends, but it moved forward a little, and a little, accumulated over time, is the only real shape that any transformation ever takes. Before you sleep tonight, perhaps it is worth sitting for a few minutes with a question. Not to answer it. Questions like this are not answered all at once. Just to carry it. To let it work beneath everything. Like a quiet process in a laboratory you have not yet fully entered. What version of yourself are you manufacturing, word by word, every single day, and do you know it? If you want to continue on this path, this attempt to see more carefully what passes unnoticed in everyday life, to inhabit your own experience with a little more awareness, there is more here, not as ready-made answers, as company from someone who is also in the middle of the process, still transmuting,